When we hear about tensions flaring up in the Middle East, our minds usually jump straight to the big stuff, right? Geopolitics, oil prices, the awful human cost of war. But there's another victim here, a hidden one, that could hit you right where you live, inside your own medicine cabinet. We're going to dive into the incredibly fragile system that brings you life-saving drugs and see how it's way more at risk than you might think.
It seems like a stretch, doesn't it? A war thousands of miles away, messing with your local pharmacy? But believe me, the dots connect. Today, we're going to follow that trail and answer this exact question because the whole system is balanced on a knife's edge. So, where does a problem like this even begin? Well, it starts at the very source. We're talking about the fundamental ingredients that make our medicines actually work. This is the first and honestly probably the most dangerous ripple effect.
Okay, first, let's get a key term down, APIs. That stands for active pharmaceutical ingredients. Just think of APIs as the magic ingredient, the powerful part of the drug that does the actual healing. Doesn't matter if it's a simple painkiller or a sophisticated cancer drug, the API is what makes it work. The whole global supply chain, everything, is built on these little compounds. And here's where we hit our first huge red flag. A massive, and I mean massive chunk of the world's supply of these essential APIs is made in just two countries, China and India. This kind of concentration is a massive vulnerability. Any little hiccup in their ability to produce or ship this stuff is felt everywhere, almost instantly.
Now, let's zoom in on the map. This brings us to a tiny strip of water that is a huge deal. A ton of these APIs have to travel through the Strait of Hormuz. It's this super narrow shipping lane, and it's basically controlled by Iran, a major player in any conflict in that region. You can see how this is basically a logistical bottleneck for the entire planet's health. So let's just put it plainly. If that strait gets blocked or becomes too dangerous to travel through, it's not just a regional problem. It could set off a worldwide shortage of the raw materials for everything from antibiotics to heart medication. And what does that mean for you? It means empty shelves at the pharmacy.
But look, the problem doesn't even stop with the ingredients. That's just part one. Getting the raw materials is one thing, but the next stage of the crisis is about the finished drugs themselves and their incredibly complex journey to the people who desperately need them.
On a good day, when everything's working, the whole process is like this intricate global dance. APIs get made, they're shipped to a factory to become pills. Those pills are shipped all over the world, distributed in each country, and finally, they land in your local pharmacy. The whole thing depends on peace and stability. But a war just shatters that stability. The contrast it's just night and day. Those open shipping lanes, they become high-risk zones or get blockaded entirely. The ports and roads you rely on, they get damaged. Suddenly, reliable delivery becomes a logistical impossibility. And just think about the practical challenges on the ground for a second. How on earth do you get vaccines or sensitive drugs that need to be kept cold through an active war zone? How do you move shipments when airports are bombed out and roads are destroyed? All this is happening at the same time that humanitarian aid groups are already stretched to the absolute breaking point. So when the supply chain breaks down like this, what do you think happens next? Well, the price of everything, it just goes through the roof. A crisis like this doesn't just stop the supply. It makes every single part of the journey more expensive. So what's pushing these costs up? Well, first, it's basic supply and demand. Those APIs become scarce, so their price skyrockets. Second, a war in the Middle East means oil prices spike, making all transportation more expensive. Then, the insurance companies charge a fortune to ship anything through a dangerous area. And to top it all off, drug companies have to pull money out of R&D just to deal with the logistical nightmare. Now, we can't know the exact number, but an increase like this, 35%, maybe more, for essential medicines, that's not some wild guess. It's what happens when all these costs hit a very fragile system at the exact same time. And let's not kid ourselves about who ends up paying for all this. Sure, drug companies and governments might absorb some of the cost, but in the end, that bill gets passed down to us, the consumers. We'll see it in higher copays and more expensive insurance plans. Beyond the immediate shock of shortages and higher prices, a long-term conflict would trigger even deeper problems. Real, systemic changes to how we make and regulate medicine that could last for years. These are the aftershocks.
So, the first major long-term casualty is regulation. You see, agencies like the FDA have to physically inspect overseas factories to make sure drugs are safe. If a region is a conflict zone, those infections just stop. And if the inspections stop, then approvals for new, potentially life-saving drugs also stop. Dead in their tracks. Second, these regulatory agencies have to completely shift their focus. All those people who are working on approving new therapies for things like Alzheimer's or cancer, they get pulled off that to manage the crisis. All their time is spent just trying to manage shortages. So innovation pretty much takes a backseat to basic survival. And all of this chaos leads to a third and massive long-term consequence, something called pharmaceutical nationalism. Basically, countries around the world would wake up and realize how incredibly vulnerable they are. Making sure you have your own drug supplies suddenly becomes an issue of national security.
So governments would start this huge push to reshore manufacturing, to bring it all back home. And that sounds like a good idea, right? Well, it's not that simple. Building brand new, high-tech pharmaceutical plants is an incredibly slow and mind-bogglingly expensive process. And the irony is, in the short run, this whole effort could make drug prices even higher.
This quote just sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? Our world is now so tightly connected that a war on one side of the planet can have a direct physical impact on the health of a family on the other side. Our global system is an amazing achievement, but it's also our greatest weakness. Which leaves us with a really tough question. We've built this incredibly efficient global system to give us affordable medicine, but we've just seen how fragile it is. So in a world that feels more and more unstable, how do we square that circle? How do we balance the need for national security with the economic reality of globalized medicine? Is it even possible to have both?